History Lunch Break from the Greensboro History Museum, and I'm Glenn Perkins. Welcome, you guys. It's time for our sort of occasionally weekly casual conversation about all things history. I hope you tuned in last week. We had a fantastic conversation as part of our Juneteenth Greensboro series, talking about voting rights and the long history of backlash about voting rights and nonpartisan work to ensure voting access to the polls for people across North Carolina. And as you can see today, I'm broadcasting from the dark offices of political consultants. We touched a little bit on the question of gerrymandering last week, and we're going to talk about that a little bit more this week. This is the backdrop for our Gerrymander Madness game that we have had at the Greensboro History Museum as part of our Project Democracy 2020 initiative and our exhibits connected to that in our museum connection point. Two of the masterminds behind Gerrymander Madness are with us here today to talk a little bit about how democracy, games, and technology can all come together to really inspire us to think about what it means to be a citizen and how we can communicate ideas about things about fair elections and fair districts and all kinds of things like that to our community within museum spaces. So let me, without further ado, welcome our two guests today. We have beaming in all the way from Durham, North Carolina, Don Shin, who is the CEO of CrossComm, a tech consultancy and developer there in the Triangle, and coming to us from about 100 feet away from me on the same floor, but long in terms of social distance, is Museum Director Carol Giorsey-Hart. We're thrilled to have both of you guys here on our History Lunch Break program. So I'd like to just kind of start off asking you guys about how initially you two came together to kind of create this idea of, oh, let's do something really nutty. Let's come up with a game to teach people about gerrymandering in North Carolina.
Well, about 2.5 years ago, I was attending a summit in Winston called The Future of Reality. And it was a discussion about virtual reality and in all its forms, its history, and its very short history, actually. And as part of the summit, they had a breakfast, I think it was breakfast and not lunch, but they would have breaks and randomly sat down at a table with Don. I was with Robert Harris, our curator of exhibits, and John was with a colleague also, and we're chatting over bagels or whatever it was. And we started talking about virtual reality and the role that virtual reality might have at the museum. And Don, I don't know if what you remember from that conversation.
Well, so what I remember was, wow, this is really cool. A museum that's interested in innovative technologies and emerging technologies and how it could potentially be leveraged to, serve the public. But when we met in person, that's kind of like how I can get excited with any organization that's forward-looking. But when we connected, I felt like I was talking with you and Robert as if with kindred spirits, because you started sharing the news about this democracy exhibit. It really resonated with me personally because I'm not a politician, I'm not in public policy, but I'm very much interested in how our government works and how a well-functioning society works. And even though I was born in Michigan, I am South Korean by ethnic heritage. And so I'm well aware that democracy is not, it's not a given. It's not a given for much of the world. And that the founding fathers talk about democracy as a grand experiment. And so when you were sharing with me about the ideas of this exhibit, that's when the juices started flowing, and this idea of like, how could technology potentially be used in a creative, story-worthy way to help people understand that our democracy is this fragile experiment, and that we all have a personal and societal responsibility to take care of our democracy.
So it was a wonderful meeting and exciting. And that's when you get a few people together and you have ideas and we start bouncing things off. We were at this summit because we recognized at the museum that virtual reality might provide a whole new way of engaging our visitors with history and with ongoing democracy in a new and exciting and different way. And we were just there to learn more about it. We had no idea that we would run into someone who might actually have the knowledge to actually produce this thing. You know, we had the ideas of what we would like to see, but to start that conversation going, this was November 2018, so we had signed up for a Smithsonian traveling exhibit on American democracy, A Great Leap of Faith, and so that was a year away, so we were heavily in planning stages, and we started brainstorming and bouncing ideas, and started to narrow in that the topic of gerrymandering is very critical to voting, which was a core concept, and to democracy. And that in fact, gerrymandering is sort of a game that politicians and people play. So if we were going to design a game, that gerrymandering was a very, very natural fit. And in fact, in real life, technology is becoming more and more an important part of the gerrymandering process, so that producing a game would be educational, to learn more about gerrymandering, more about the democratic process, and also could be a lot of fun. So I think we pretty quickly narrowed in on that. We pretty quickly said, you know, a lot of museums are using virtual reality to create immersive experiences, and they can be used very effectively, but that really wasn't what we were going to go for. We were going for something new and different.
So we went for the game, and which evolved into this over about several months of development, right, with you and your team, Don. Coming into to create this game, Gerrymander Madness, and thanks to the amazing technology at our fingertips right now, you have a way to kind of do a quick demo for us, right? To show us what the game looked like in person.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, a couple things that I'll say and to preface that. There's a reason why the saying exists: game the system, right? And so we call this Gerrymander Madness the anti-democracy game, where basically a player plays the role of a political staffer in an office, determining the future fate of the North Carolina elections through determining the map. And so what this player will be able to do is be able to kind of basically manipulate the district lines in real time, and to be able to get confirmation when they've disenfranchised enough voters to kind of flip a district from one color to another. Doesn't matter your political affiliation, doesn't matter whether you're rooting for red or for blue. The point of this game is to demonstrably show that the system can be gamed by either side. And that's the fragility of our democracy that we all need to be aware of. So bear that in mind as we do this demo.
And while Don's kind of setting up and getting his equipment ready, Carol, maybe you could talk a little bit about the context and the place that we put the Gerrymander Madness game within the History Museum exhibits for American democracy.
Yeah, we have a space that we've developed at the museum called Connection Point that was meant to be a highly interactive space, both with the exhibits that were there, the typewriters, for example, card games, other things, but also as an opportunity to communicate, engage with your people you were with or with other visitors. So we already had this great space that we had already called Connection Point that had worked really successfully with a typewriter exhibit, and it made sense to bring the virtual reality game into this space. As part of the traveling exhibit, they also had a section called Unity Square that included interactive card games and other ways. Again, an important part of the museum experience.
And I think it was so interesting because this whole, not just that part of the Smithsonian exhibit, but really the whole idea of the connection space was real to get people to engage in different ways that they hadn't engaged, or they're not used to maybe engaging at a history museum in particular.
Yeah.
Now it looks like it sounds like we have some lovely background music. And Don, if you want to give me the thumbs up, you can take us away into the deep world of gerrymander madness.
So, a visitor to the museum would see some introductory language on how to play the game, what exactly gerrymandering is, you don't know. And basically, if you don't know what gerrymandering is, it's basically drawing the district for a particular outcome, but throwing in as much votes that don't affect the ultimate outcomes, so that disenfranchising the effectiveness of the votes and the value of the other side's voters. So there's a few ways to gerrymander. You can hack or crack districts, and by concentrating all the blue or red voters in one particular district to minimize their impact on other districts, or to spread out one particular political leaning's votes amongst multiple districts, and thereby diluting that the impact of that group of voters without ultimately changing the political outcome. So we're going to see here at the desk of a staffer, and I am going to, after I get through some of this onboarding instructions, I've got this map of North Carolina. See here that in my hand I have a kind of a wand, almost like a laser pointer controller. Depending on the district I'm pointing to, I can see the district being by voters. I also have this three-dimensional spatial map in front of me, right here on top of my desk, where I can see where the heavily concentrated populations are within North Carolina, and that shows basically the weight of that portion of the map in regards to voting strength. So what I'm going to do here, for instance, is this district here is going to vote. Because right now, I can see on the map below me, it's destined to vote blue. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start this here, making a very upwardly looking map here to capture some of these voters. Also going to treat this. See, actually now this one just turned blue. So red. But so I can play around with different map configurations and see the impact in real time. And I don't know if you could see it here, but this laptop screen basically shows me the outcome of all the districts, how many districts are going to vote for, predicted to vote red versus blue. And with the exact same population map, the exact same state of North Carolina, I can use the changing of these district lines to change the outcome of the election from red to blue or vice versa. And you can see here, there's this ultimate scoreboard of disenfranchised votes. If I'm a Democratic politician, I'm looking to maximize the disenfranchised votes of red voters. And if I am a Republican politician, I may want to try to disenfranchise as many Democratic voters. And again, same map, same population set, but two different political outcomes.
And of course, you could try to make them as even as possible, but then you wouldn't be playing the game. So that's why we worked, or you guys developed it so that one side would be likely I guess the outcome is that the more voters you disfranchise, the better you do. You win, but democracy loses, right?
That is indeed correct. And as you can
That
see here, on this leaderboard screen, we actually have two leaderboards, one Democratic leaderboard and one Republican leaderboard, because again, we want to communicate that gerrymandering is a nonpartisan issue, and it is a mechanism that can be taken advantage by Democrats as much as Republicans. And so this should be a matter that concerns all of us, regardless of your political affiliation.
And it's just good to show you too how much geography and is an important factor. And I think that one thing that the game does really well is kind of to show how just those lines and the way that we sort of divide up the state really has a big political impact on how our state is governed.
And over the course of 2019 was a very historic year for gerrymandering in North Carolina, as well as Maryland, where this issues of gerrymandering went actually to the Supreme Court, and a decision came down in June 2019. And sort of threw it back to the state, and then there was subsequent legislation at the state, North Carolina state level, and in Maryland as well. So maps are being redrawn and districts are changing. We also talk a little bit about the importance of the census for most states in impacting how these districts are drawn and making that connection. So gerrymandering is a very important part of the democratic process. And so really understanding that, I think, is an important part of our exhibit.
I think, Glenn, you're on mute.
So I want to get back and talk a little bit more about how using technology is an interesting way to communicate these things within the museum setting. So as you were thinking about this, Dawn, and your team, did you guys have different questions that kind of came up at developing this game in a way that would be different because you knew it was going to be within this exhibit space of the museum?
Yeah. So with this game, firstly, as I alluded to earlier, we wanted to make this a game where there were more than one way to win, where it would actually elicit more questions than answers. And that's why it was really, really important for us to be able to play and try to game the system for either side. The other thing that was kind of like contextual specific to the museum was, right now, this application was built for these desktop VR headsets that are tethered to a machine. And we thought that it would be a special experience and worth the trip to expose people and give people the opportunity to expose themselves to cutting edge VR technology that they may not necessarily have ready access to or have at home. And thirdly, we wanted to, there's actually 2 stations in the space that it's set up. We wanted to give people a sense of being transported and teleported into this environment in an immersive fashion, because role playing and being able to kind of take that to the maximum extent possible, being able to put someone into a person's shoes was really important for us for the storytelling aspect, so that they can kind of get a sense of like, wow, I really am here in this office, I really am here at this desk, and I really am kind of determining the fate of North Carolina. So it was important for us to kind of have that immersive experience that just for a moment in that space, they can be cut off from all other distractions and then really embody that role.
Oh, Glenn, you're muted.
At the same time, it was really interesting because you did have two stations, but at the same, so you're in this world where you have your goggles on, and it really seems like you're somewhere else, like you're within this office. But there's people behind you, and maybe somebody else playing the game right next to you, and so there's a lot of conversations that got started. Carol, do you want to talk a little bit about sort of the museum's goal in arranging it that way?
Yeah, and one of the reasons we call it Connection Point is not only to connect people with history, to start conversations with people in the area, and because people are jointly participating in the game. And we do have a large monitor, or two large monitors, so other visitors can see your progress and can watch what you're doing. So it is not a single experience, because people around you, your friends or even not, can say, hey, what about doing that? And, oh, look what you did, and they clap or whatever. So that's been an interesting part. The other thing is, it's been, not everyone is comfortable or familiar with virtual reality or putting on a headset. And what's been really fun is how younger people are teaching their older family members, or sometimes strangers, what to do and not to be fearful. Elsewhere in the space, sometimes our older visitors are teaching younger people how to put the paper in the typewriter, or what to do there. So there's a real sharing and pointing out of some of the other information that's in the space. For example, we do have a history of the districts in North Carolina. You can just look at the maps, and so you don't even need to say anything when you start to recognize why are there these worm-shaped districts in North Carolina. And as you participate in a very embodied way, you feel the experience. And our hope is, and our belief from studies, is that you're more likely to remember from having actually participated in disenfranchisement and creating districts than if you had just read it on the wall. And from what we've seen, that is true.
Yeah, and Don, I guess we should clarify that you and your team really did a lot of research into the actual district maps as they were, and of course they've been changing throughout this time period since 2018. Can you explain a little bit sort of how those lines and the data that the program uses, where you guys got that?
Yeah, and I see that Sarah, hi Sarah, has asked a question related to that. So we actually based the district lines and the population density and the political leaning loosely on actual real data for North Carolina at the time. Now, we did also find out, though, that basically, you could see that the size of the pieces on the map are these hexagonal pieces. And we wanted to kind of make it granular enough to make interesting looking districts, salamander-like districts. At the same time, we didn't want it to be so fine that it felt more like work and less like play and experimentation. So we had to make some adjustments just to make the data actually usable within the game. But by and large, we took a population density map, we scanned it, and then we assigned those values to the hexagonal pieces. And then we also did the same for political leaning, scanned the actual population leaning map, and then interpreted that into hexagonal piece game data. And I think that leads to another kind of observation, which is that because this is all data driven and the map comes from map data, that we could conceivably also replicate that process for other states and other geographies, or create, fictitious worlds like the political outcome of Middle Earth or something. So there's a lot of different possibilities for where this technology platform can go in the future.
And as far as Sarah's question, I mean, is it updatable as the political situation in North Carolina changes?
Yes. Well, we would need to generate a new map, certainly from new data. But as long as that data was available, then that's completely feasible. I think maybe in the future, like one project, sub-project to potentially explore would be to create maybe a graphical map editor or something along those lines. But that's right now the data is was basically generated from visual map data and put into a data chunk, a data file. So, but yeah, that data can certainly be changed.
I want to pick up a little bit too about your idea that you were talking about of digital storytelling. Again, that VR technology works so well because you're immersing yourself in the play of shaping those maps and learning about what goes on, maybe in the thinking of how one gerrymanders. What are some others, and I know you're working on some projects too that are looking at storytelling within different contexts. Can you talk about those a little bit?
Yeah, so there's one experimental project that we are in kind of design and discovery for. And this is a project that is kind of, or CrossComm's taking a good amount of initiative in, is exploring how can technology be used to enable the average member of the community or the average citizen within the community to tell his or her own story as to what the community means to that person, that member, and to explore that member's relationship with his surrounding community. And how can those stories be used to foster a greater sense of societal cohesion, especially during a time when we're all socially distanced from each other. And I mean, a community has been challenged anyways by our modern era, by transitory lifestyles, by, leaving and moving areas. And many times we don't know our neighbor. And it's hard to love your neighbor if you don't know your neighbor. And it's hard to feel like you belong to a community and this community belongs to you. Do we not all want to go to a place where everybody knows your name, where you feel safe and you feel like you're a part of something that's bigger than yourself? And so I'm thinking about how technology can potentially address that. And the project or the platform that I've been kind of mulling over is a platform called Stories Around Us that would allow for individual contributors within a community to upload selfie videos, sharing what this community means to him or her, but also use that platform as a way to disseminate these stories directly to the members of a community, even if they're under lockdown, i.e. in emerging platforms, not just your mobile phone, but maybe your smart TV, your Internet of Things device, or your Amazon Echo Show that's in your kitchen. There has to be a way that technology can be used to help us to feel not only connected with each other, but really have a sense of kinship with each other. That you as my neighbor and us as part of this joint community, that our fates are intertwined. And so that's something that I've been kind of putting a lot of thought into and still garnering a lot of feedback from people like yourself, because at the end of the day, I need to validate this this idea and also garner additional feedback from other storytellers like yourself. But hopefully, when we talk next, I'll have some more stories about where it's at and its build out.
And I think it seems to me to be a really innovative idea as well, because you're kind of shifting where the narrative's coming from. Even in traditional gaming, the idea is that the programmer is making the story and delivering the story, although the player may be playing it out. And Carol, I'm going to bring this back to you a little bit, because I think that's represents a little bit of a shift in museum world too, right? Traditionally, the museum curators or somebody like that have been the ones who are really delivering the story. But do you think there's a shift in which we're starting to listen more to the community and letting the community be the storytellers?
Absolutely, and this has really been going on for at least 30 years, this especially in history and cultural museums, where we recognize we are all museum professionals, we've studied a lot, but we're not the experts on our community's history necessarily. In fact, if we want to get the experts, we have to go out in the community. And that's what we've really been making pains to do. You know, we do have a lot of expertise here and we can provide context, but to tell our community's story, the community is the one telling the story. And we recognize that in the past, sometimes a lot of stories were missed, and maybe as museum professionals and academics, we weren't in being as inclusive as we should have been, and we're trying to make up for that right now, for sure. In this moment of time, it's a recognition. We're looking at the spaces between the stories that we're telling and the voices. And sometimes there were voices of the young, or voices of women, or voices of African Americans, or people of color, or transgender. You know, there's so many stories. So being aware that we shouldn't be picking and choosing, we need to have the people participate, is a really critical moment for museum field historians right now.
I kind of want to end with one big question that I'm going to kind of ask both of you guys to answer. I want to know what you think that each of us can learn from the other's field. So, I mean, what's one big thing that museums can learn from wise tech people like Don? And Don, what's one big thing that you felt that you've either learned from working with the museum, or you look forward to learning from museum kind of community settings in the future?
Should I go first?
You go first, okay.
You know, I place a lot of value on history and what we can learn from history. And you know, there's a saying I've heard that one thing we learn from history is that we don't learn from history. We don't learn from history enough, and we kind of make the same kind of mistakes over and over again. And I'm big into context, and I think that we in the technology world can be really optimistic and really excited and passionate about how new possibilities and new inventions could be used for good. And I think we should be that way. I really do. I also think we should also be aware of the unintended consequences of technology and the unintended side effects of technology. It's not to say that we should be Luddites. I mean, goodness, I basically built my career on innovation and technology, but that I think history can inform us on what has been historically important to the human experience and the question of what it means to live as a human in the context of society. And I think you guys championing that, you know, what is it really that speaks to the human condition beyond just exciting new trends and things like that, can help give us perspective on how to make sure that these new innovations and new technologies are harnessed effectively towards the improvement of the human condition.
And Glenn, that's a huge question. I think we need a whole nother session on that. And for sure, the technology, in some way, it's a tool. It's another tool. It's another way to communicate. But, and here's where the anthropologist in me will come out, it also creates new contexts, and sometimes subtly, and we're not even aware, it starts to shape the way we communicate. And, you know, that play back and forth is just really important. And technology can seem to be getting ahead of the wisdom that the user will have in how to use the technology. Gerrymandering is a really good example where the technology is moving so fast, where you can pinpoint by household how people will lean based on public information, and that huge big data is being used in certain ways. This webinar Zoom call is starting to shape the way we communicate, and we start to communicate in different ways because of the technology. So this is all really interesting. One more big point though, this was all developed in a time before COVID. We developed thoughtfully our connection space to connect physically people and to connect with technology in a way that is so 2019. So we're having to think, we can't expect strangers to be close up and interact. Putting on that face mask could be a bit of a problem. How can we solve this disconnect between wanting people to connect and interact in our space, but do it safely? So we're rethinking that, but one way is we did create this virtual, with Don, we have a virtual world that exists virtually. It's not here at the museum, although we were hoping to be that first portal experience maybe for people, but we already have it, and Don had it, and I said, you know, we have to make this available to many more people. People could be doing this from their homes, from their schools, from other places. So Don, share this exciting news about the gerrymander game.
Yes, so the first step towards making this experience more accessible in this coronavirus age is to get this application published on the Steam and Oculus stores to work on people's home VR headsets on the Oculus Vive, I'm sorry, the HTC Vive and the Oculus Rift headsets respectively. So that's our first step towards trying to get this technology and get this experience in your hands rather than requiring the public to necessarily travel, because again, we live in extraordinary times. So we're in the process of publishing the game to those two stores right now, and I'm hoping it will be available within the week.
It's going to be exciting.
As a free download.
Yeah. For free. Let us not forget that. So free museum, and now it's going to be a free download, Gerrymander Madness, the anti-democracy game you can play within your own Oculus. So that'll be really exciting stuff. We will be sharing out, I guess, as soon as we know the quickest and easiest place to find that. And of course, we want to hear from anybody who's interested in games, about other things that we could think about in going into the future. Our democracy project is not ended with the temporary closure of the museum building or the finish of the American Democracy: A Great Leap of Faith traveling exhibition from the Smithsonian. We will be continuing to talk about North Carolina democracy into the fall, both in the museum when we do reopen, and there's lots of great resources online at greensborohistory.org/democracy. So more programs coming ahead. We'll be talking about these kinds of issues all throughout the fall. So I hope if you guys are interested in learning more about North Carolina democracy, about legislative districts, gerrymandering, voting, protests, we've got programs and plans for all that wonderful stuff coming up. And we'll be taking next week off for History Lunch Break, but we are going to be back in a couple weeks with some great new programs coming throughout July. So I hope you'll tune in. We're seeming to come, like I said, occasionally Fridays at noon. So plan your casual Fridays around us. And we will always deliver you something interesting for your history lunch break. So again, my name is Glenn Perkins. I want to thank my special guests today. Don Shin, Carol Gorty Hart, thank you guys so much for taking a little time to talk to the audience out there on the webs. And again, stay tuned for more history lunch breaks coming up in the future. Thanks, guys, very much, and we'll see you next time.